Welcome to the south of Armenia. You are now standing near one of the most remarkable historical sites in the country, the Tatev Monastery. Before we begin discussing the monastery itself, take a moment to look around you. In front of you is the Vorotan Gorge. The depth of this gorge reaches several hundred meters. At the bottom flows the Vorotan River. The slopes are steep, in many places almost vertical. This landscape is not just visually impressive, it is essential to understanding why Tatev exists here. The monastery was founded in the 9th century. At that time, Armenia was going through a period of recovery and consolidation after centuries of foreign rule. Religious centers played an important role, but they were not only places of worship. They were also centers of administration, education, and cultural preservation. Tatev became one of the most important of these centers. Now, consider its location more carefully. Today, it is relatively easy to reach, especially thanks to the cable car known as the Wings of Tatev. However, in the medieval period, access was extremely difficult. Roads were narrow and often dangerous. Travel could take many hours, sometimes days. This difficulty was not a disadvantage, it was a form of protection. Tatev functioned as a naturally fortified site. The gorge acted as a defensive barrier. Approaching the monastery was possible only through limited paths. These paths could be easily monitored and controlled. This meant that even a small group could defend the site against a much larger force. Now let us focus on the main structure. In front of you is the Church of Saints Paul and Peter. It was built between the years 895 and 906. This church is a classic example of medieval Armenian architecture. Notice the proportions. The walls are thick. The structure is compact. The dome rises above the central space. These elements are not only aesthetic, they are functional. This region is seismically active. Earthquakes have occurred here throughout history. The builders understood this. They designed the structure to withstand stress and movement. The geometry of the building helps distribute forces evenly. That is one of the reasons why it has survived for more than 11 centuries. Now, as we move further into the complex, pay attention to a tall stone column standing separately. This is known as the Gavazon column. At first glance, it may appear decorative. In reality, it had a practical purpose. The column was designed to move slightly. During seismic activity or ground vibrations, it would begin to sway. This movement could serve as an early warning. It allowed the inhabitants to react to potential danger. This feature demonstrates an important aspect of medieval Armenian thinking. Architecture was not only symbolic, it was also functional and responsive to the environment. Now let us turn to another important role of Tatev. Beyond religion and defense, it was a major center of education. By the 14th and 15th centuries, Tatev had developed into what is often called the University of Tatev. Scholars came here from different regions. They studied a wide range of subjects. These included theology, philosophy, logic, and elements of natural science. But one of the most important activities here was the copying of manuscripts. At that time, books were not printed. Every text had to be reproduced by hand. This process was slow and required great attention. Scribes worked carefully, line by line. Mistakes were not easily corrected. Each manuscript represented many hours, sometimes months of work. This is why monasteries like Tatev were so important. They were not only places where knowledge was stored, they were places where knowledge was preserved and multiplied. If a text was not copied, it could be lost forever. In this sense, Tatev played a crucial role in maintaining intellectual continuity. Now, imagine the conditions under which this work was done. The environment was quiet. There were no external distractions. Life followed a strict routine. The day was divided into periods of prayer, study, and work. This structure created discipline. It also created focus. However, it required a certain type of mindset. Living in isolation is not easy. For some, it strengthens concentration. For others, it can feel overwhelming. The monks who lived here had to adapt to this environment, day after day, year after year. This isolation, however, was also a form of protection. It reduced outside interference. It allowed the community to function with stability. But no system remains unchanged forever. Over time, external pressures began to affect the region. There were political conflicts, invasions disrupted life, trade routes shifted. And in addition to human factors, there were natural ones. Earthquakes caused damage to the buildings, some structures required repair, others were partially lost. Gradually, the influence of Tatev began to decline. This did not happen suddenly. It was a slow process. By the 17th century, Tatev was no longer the major educational center it once had been. The university ceased its activity. The number of residents decreased. The monastery entered a quieter phase of its history. However, it is important to note that it was never completely abandoned. This is a key point. Many historical sites disappear entirely once their primary function is lost. Tatev did not. It continued to exist, even if at a reduced scale. This continuity is one of the reasons it remains so significant today. Let us now move forward in time and look at the more recent history of Tatev. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the monastery had already passed through its most active periods. Its role as an educational center was long gone. However, its historical and cultural value remained clear. During the Soviet period, many religious institutions across Armenia were closed or repurposed. Tatev was not an exception. Religious activity was limited. Maintenance of the site was inconsistent. As a result, parts of the complex began to deteriorate. Structures that had stood for centuries were now at risk. But despite this, the core of the monastery survived. The main church remained standing. Several auxiliary buildings were still intact. This resilience again reflects the strength of the original construction. After the independence of Armenia in 1991, attention gradually returned to historical and cultural heritage sites. Tatev became part of restoration and preservation efforts. Specialists began to study the structures more carefully. Work was carried out to stabilize and repair damaged sections. The goal was not only to preserve the site, but also to make it accessible. This brings us to one of the most significant modern developments connected to Tatev, the construction of the wings of Tatev. This cable car system connects the monastery with the nearby village across the gorge. It stretches over the deep valley of the Vorotan. For many visitors, the journey itself becomes part of the experience. Before its construction, reaching Tatev required a long and often difficult drive through mountainous terrain. The road included sharp turns and steep sections. Travel time could be unpredictable. With the cable car, access became much easier and faster. This had a direct impact on tourism. The number of visitors increased significantly. People from different countries could now reach the monastery without the physical difficulty that once defined the journey. However, this change also introduced a new question. How do you balance accessibility with preservation? More visitors mean more attention, but they also mean more pressure on the site. Foot traffic increases. The need for infrastructure grows. Maintaining the authenticity of the place becomes more challenging. This is not a problem unique to Tatev. It is something faced by many historical sites around the world. The goal is to find a balance, to allow people to experience the site while protecting its integrity. At Tatev, this balance is still being developed. Efforts are made to guide visitors, preserve structures, and maintain the overall atmosphere. Now, as you stand here, it is worth considering how the experience has changed over time. Centuries ago, arriving at Tatev required effort, planning, and endurance. Today, it requires much less, but the physical landscape remains the same. The gorge has not changed. The scale of the environment is still impressive. If you take a moment to pause and observe, you may notice something. Despite the presence of modern elements, the site still carries a sense of distance, a sense of separation from everyday life. This is one of the reasons why Tatev continues to attract attention. It offers not only history, but also perspective. Let us now take a moment to focus not only on history, but on the experience of being here. When people visit the Tatev Monastery, they often expect to see architecture. And of course, the architecture is important. But what makes this place different is not only what you see, it is what you feel when you are here. Look again at the surrounding landscape. The depth of the Vorotan Gorge creates a strong sense of scale. Distances appear larger. Sounds travel differently. Wind becomes more noticeable. There is a certain quietness here, not complete silence, but a reduced level of noise compared to urban environments. This affects perception. It slows down attention. It allows you to notice details that are often ignored. For example, the texture of the stone, the way light falls on the walls during different times of the day, the contrast between the built structures and the natural surroundings. These elements are subtle, but together they create a specific atmosphere. Now consider the people who lived here. For them, this was not a temporary visit. This was their daily environment. They experienced this landscape every day, in all weather conditions, in all seasons. This had an impact on how they thought, how they worked, and how they lived. Their routines were structured, their responsibilities were clear, but their environment was constant. It did not change quickly, and this kind of stability can influence behavior. It can create focus, but it can also create isolation. Understanding this helps us better interpret the site. Tatev is not only a collection of buildings, it is a place where human activity was shaped by geography. Now let us also consider the architectural details more closely. Armenian medieval architecture is known for its balance between simplicity and precision. Decorative elements are present, but they are not excessive. The emphasis is on proportion and structure. This can be seen clearly in the main church. Lines are clean, forms are stable, materials are used efficiently. This approach reflects practical priorities: durability, function, longevity. At the same time, symbolic meaning is not absent. Religious architecture always carries layers of interpretation. However, at Tatev, symbolism does not dominate structure. Instead, it is integrated into it. This creates a sense of unity between purpose and meaning. As we move through the complex, you may notice that the layout is not random. Spaces are organized in relation to each other. Paths connect functional areas. Open and closed spaces are balanced. This organization supports both daily life and movement. It allows the monastery to function as a complete system. Even today, despite changes and partial losses, this structure can still be understood. The Tatev Monastery is not defined by a single function. It is not only a religious site, it is not only a historical monument, and it is not only a tourist destination. It is a combination of all these roles. At different points in time, one role became more important than the others. In the early period, it was a center of faith and regional organization. Later, it became a major educational institution. Then, it entered a phase of decline, and today it exists as a preserved cultural site. Each of these stages adds to its meaning. Another important aspect is its relationship with the environment. The monastery was not placed here randomly. It was positioned with intention. The landscape provided protection. It also influenced daily life. This connection between human construction and natural surroundings is one of the defining characteristics of Tatev. Now consider the idea of continuity. Despite periods of decline, the monastery was never completely lost. It remained present. This continuity allows us to study it today, to understand not only the structures, but also the processes behind them, the construction methods, the social organization, the intellectual activity. All of these elements are part of the site. Finally, let us return to the present moment. You are standing in a place that has existed for more than 1,000 years. Many people have stood here before you, monks, scholars, travelers. Each of them experienced this place differently, but they all interacted with the same environment, the same stone, the same landscape. This creates a connection across time, not direct but perceptible, and this is perhaps the most important takeaway. Tatev is not only something to observe, it is something to reflect on. It shows how people adapted to difficult conditions, how they organized knowledge, how they built structures meant to last, and how these structures can survive even when their original function changes. Thank you for your attention. You may now continue exploring the monastery at your own pace. If you look carefully, you will likely notice details that were not immediately visible. And that is part of the experience.
Деятельности обители, она была построена за пределами монастыря, чтобы не нарушать покой монахов, а еще чтобы жители окрестных сел могли свободно пользоваться ею.
Վանականները ձև էին պատրաստում 15 տարբեր տեսակի սերմերից և բույսերից, ինչպիսիք են քունջութը, կանեփը, մանանեխը, կտավատը և այլն։ Նրանք սերմերում լցնում էին հսկա աղացակարը, որը մտնում էր ձևերի և մանրացնում։ Սերմերը մաքրում էին, իսկ պատրաստի ձևը ջրշմապրակ, քարե տուգրաններով հոսում էր ուժերի մեջ։
Mustard, flax, and many others. After roasting the seeds, they would grind them in a millstone, driven by an ox. The finished oil would flow under pressure through stone grooves and collected in jars.
В те времена монахи производили масло из 15 различных видов семян и растений, таких как кунжут, лен, горчица, крахмал. Зерна помещались в огнем и перетирались массивным каменным желобом, который приводил в движение воду. Уже готовое масло стекало по каменным желобам.
Ձևն օգտագործում էին ուտելիքի պատրաստման, դեղերի արտադրության և այլ կենցաղային կարիքների համար։ Այն նաև ծառայում էր որպես բարենիք լատերների համար։ Ձևը նաև վաճառում կամ փոխանակում էին։ Այն հաճախ օգտագործում էր վանքի պաշտպանության համար։ Երացրած ձևով տակարները շուռ էին տալիս գրողող հակառակորդի վրա։
The oil had many uses. It was used for cooking, medicine, as fuel for lamps, and other household purposes.
Իսկ հաջորդ սրահում տեղակայված են աղացակարերի հատվածներ, որոնք հայտնաբերվել են ձիթանում պեղումների ժամանակ։ Ձիթանում կա նաև հուշանվերների խանութ, որտեղ կարող եք գտնել հնագույն տեխնոլոգիաներով պատրաստված ձեթ, բնական քսուկներ և ձեռագործ օճառներ։
The Tatev oil mill became the first building to be restored as part of the Tatev revival project. In one of the halls, you can see the old millstone, which have also been recently restored. The other hall contains the remains of millstones which were discovered during the
Надо писать снизу.